When we speak about the man a narcissistic woman never forgets, we are not talking about charm, status, or even strength in the conventional sense. We are talking about something far more unsettling to her psyche: emotional unavailability that is not rooted in fear, but in self-awareness. This kind of man is not closed off. He is not cold. He is simply not desperate to be chosen. And that distinction changes everything. From a psychological perspective, a narcissistic personality is driven by the need for external regulation, validation, admiration, emotional reactions. These are not luxuries for her. They are necessities. The man who is emotionally reactive becomes predictable, and what is predictable is ultimately disposable. But the man who has done his inner work operates differently. He knows what he feels, why he feels it, and most importantly, he does not outsource responsibility for those feelings to anyone else. Carl Jung spoke often about individuation, the process of becoming a whole, integrated self, rather than a fragmented personality dependent on masks. A man who has moved along this path does not need to perform intimacy to feel real. He can be present without merging, connected without losing himself. To a narcissistic woman, this is deeply confusing. She senses depth, but she cannot access it on her terms. This man listens, but he does not over-explain. He cares, but he does not cling. His emotional availability is selective, intentional, and grounded in values rather than impulse. Because he does not chase closeness, closeness with him feels earned and therefore rare. The narcissistic woman may feel drawn to this as a challenge, but what truly marks her is the realization that she cannot rush him, rush intimacy, or provoke him into emotional excess. And here is the paradox. The more secure and self-contained he is, the more he becomes unforgettable. Not because he withholds, but because he does not abandon himself to be accepted. The closing truth is this: when a man is rooted in self-knowledge, his presence becomes a mirror, and not everyone can tolerate what it reflects. What truly destabilizes a narcissistic woman is not confrontation, not anger, not even rejection in the dramatic sense, but boundaries that are enforced without emotion. The man she never forgets is the one who can say no and remain internally calm while doing so. This is rare, because most people set boundaries defensively. They explain, justify, argue, or soften the limit in hopes of being understood. But this man does none of that. His boundary is not a negotiation. It is a statement of reality. Psychologically, narcissistic dynamics depend on emotional leverage. Conflict, guilt, sympathy, and confusion are all tools that pull the other person back into engagement. When a man responds to boundary violations with anger, he is still emotionally hooked. When he over-explains, he is still seeking approval. But when he sets a boundary and does not escalate, when there is no visible charge to manipulate, the dynamic collapses. There is nothing to push against. Carl Jung understood this at a deeper level through the idea of the ego and the shadow. A calm boundary reflects an ego that is no longer fighting its own shadow. This man is not suppressing resentment, nor is he acting from fear of loss. He has already accepted the possibility of disappointment, separation, and misunderstanding. Because of that, he does not need to defend his limits emotionally. He simply lives them. To a narcissistic woman, this is profoundly unsettling. She may attempt to provoke through charm, accusation, withdrawal, or vulnerability, but the response remains steady, not cold, not cruel, just clear. And clarity, when it cannot be bent, feels like rejection, even when it is not intended that way. The boundary communicates something unspoken but unmistakable. I will not abandon myself to maintain access to you. This is why such men are remembered, not because they were loud or dominant, but because they could not be destabilized. Their sense of self did not depend on the other person's reaction. In a world where emotional chaos often equals intimacy, calm refusal feels like power. The reflection to leave with is simple but demanding. When your boundaries are grounded in self-respect rather than emotion, you no longer need permission to protect your inner life, and that is when your presence becomes impossible to forget. There is another layer that makes a man unforgettable to a narcissistic woman, and it is far more unsettling than boundaries or emotional restraint. It is the moment she realizes that he sees through the mask and chooses not to tear it off. This man recognizes the patterns, the charm that appears too quickly, the subtle shifts between admiration and devaluation, the carefully framed victimhood. He understands what is happening on a psychological level. But instead of exposing, accusing, or trying to correct her, he does something far more disarming. He steps back with awareness. Most people, once they see manipulation, feel an almost compulsive need to name it. They confront, argue, diagnose, or moralize. But confrontation still keeps the narcissistic dynamic alive. It creates drama, hierarchy, and emotional engagement. The man who leaves a lasting imprint refuses this role. He does not need to prove that he is right or that she is wrong. He simply adjusts his level of access. Carl Jung spoke about the persona, the social mask we present to the world, and the danger of identifying too strongly with it. A narcissistic woman survives by protecting that persona at all costs. To be exposed feels annihilating, but to be seen clearly and calmly, without attack, is something else entirely. It creates an internal tension she cannot easily resolve. She senses that the illusion has failed, yet there is no enemy to fight. This man does not shame her. He does not diagnose her. He does not announce his insight. His clarity is internal, and his response is behavioral rather than verbal. He becomes less available, less reactive, less invested in performance. And because there is no open conflict, the narcissistic woman is left alone with the most uncomfortable experience of all: self-awareness without external blame. What marks her is not that he figured her out, but that he did not need to announce it. His silence is not ignorance, it is discernment. He knows that real power is not in exposing another's shadow, but in refusing to be pulled into it. The thought to carry forward is this: when you learn to see clearly, without the urge to conquer or correct, you step out of psychological games entirely. And that quiet exit is often the most unforgettable move of all. There is a moment that defines everything, and it is rarely dramatic. It is the moment he walks away while attachment is still alive. Not after betrayal explodes, not after resentment hardens, but at the precise point where investment has formed and expectations have quietly taken root. This is the point a narcissistic woman never forgets, because it violates the script she relies on. In most relational dynamics, departure happens after exhaustion. People leave when they are emptied, angry, or finally pushed too far. That kind of exit brings closure, even relief. But when a man leaves at the peak of connection, when things still feel promising, it creates an unresolved psychological loop. The mind keeps returning to what was not finished, what was not conquered, what was not owned. This man does not leave impulsively. His departure is not punishment, manipulation, or a bid to be chased. It is the result of clarity. He senses the cost of staying, the subtle erosion of self, the creeping demand to perform, the pressure to abandon inner truth, and he chooses himself without spectacle. No speeches, no ultimatums, no need to win the narrative. Carl Jung understood that the psyche seeks completion. When a pattern is interrupted before resolution, it lingers in the unconscious. A narcissistic woman expects others to stay long enough to be reshaped, diminished, or discarded. When a man removes himself while still desired, the usual arc collapses. There is no final scene where she regains control. No evidence that she was the deciding force. What unsettles her is not the loss itself, but the unanswered question it leaves behind. Why wasn't I enough to make him abandon himself? That question cannot be externalized. There is no clear villain, no dramatic betrayal to point to, only absence. And absence, when unexplained, has weight. This is why silence after departure is so powerful. Not ghosting born of fear, but distance grounded in self-respect. The man does not hover at the edges of her life. He does not check back in. He does not need to be remembered. And precisely because of that, he is. The reflection to leave with is this. When you choose to walk away before you lose yourself, you don't just protect your future. You create a moment that lingers far longer than any argument ever could. There is something profoundly disorienting to a narcissistic woman about a man who does not try to be understood. Most people, when conflict arises, feel an almost moral urgency to explain themselves. They want fairness, recognition, and emotional reciprocity. They want their intentions clarified and their pain acknowledged. But this man senses a deeper truth. In certain dynamics, the need to be understood becomes the final point of control handed over. He realizes that explanation in the wrong psychological environment is not clarity, it is exposure. Every attempt to justify oneself offers more material to be reframed, minimized, or weaponized. So he stops, not because he lacks depth, but because he respects it. He understands that insight does not require agreement, and dignity does not require validation. Carl Jung wrote about the danger of projecting meaning onto those who cannot receive it. When a man insists on being understood by someone who lacks the capacity or willingness for genuine empathy, he fractures his own center. The man who remains unforgettable accepts this limitation without bitterness. He does not argue reality into existence. He does not chase emotional closure from someone incapable of providing it. Instead, he allows misunderstanding, raw standing to exist. This is not indifference, it is psychological maturity. He knows who he is. He knows why he acted. And he is at peace with the fact that his inner truth does not need external confirmation. To a narcissistic woman, this is deeply unsettling. She is accustomed to others orbiting her perception, pleading to be seen correctly. When a man calmly steps out of that orbit, the power dynamic reverses. What haunts her is not what he said, but what he refused to say. No final defense, no emotional testimony, no attempt to control how he is remembered. In refusing to manage her perception, he denies her a central role in defining him. That absence becomes louder than any explanation ever could. This is where many men falter. They believe silence means loss. In reality, silence chosen from self-respect is sovereignty. It signals an internal authority that cannot be negotiated with emotion. The thought to carry with you is this: when you stop needing to be understood by the wrong person, you reclaim your psychological center. And from that place, you become impossible to diminish or forget. What ultimately seals a man into the memory of a narcissistic woman is not how he leaves, but what happens after he is gone. He does not collapse. He does not spiral publicly. He does not attempt to signal regret, bitterness, or longing. Instead, something far more disturbing occurs. He continues to grow, and he does so without reference to her. No revenge narrative, no dramatic reinvention meant to be seen, just a quiet, unmistakable movement forward. In narcissistic dynamics, others are often experienced less as independent beings and more as extensions, sources of supply, mirrors for identity, instruments of regulation. When a man's sense of worth was never anchored in her approval, his post-separation evolution becomes impossible to personalize. She cannot claim credit for his success, nor can she frame his growth as a reaction to her absence. That ambiguity is deeply unsettling. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as a lifelong process of becoming oneself, not in opposition to others, but in alignment with one's inner truth. The man who becomes better without her embodies this principle. His growth is not fueled by resentment or the need to prove anything. It is organic, integrated, quietly confident. And because it is not performative, it cannot be dismissed as compensation or ego defense. What lingers in her psyche is the realization that she was not the axis of his transformation. He did not need to lose her to find himself, nor did he need to conquer her to reclaim power. His trajectory suggests something far more threatening to a narcissistic structure: that his life has an internal center she never touched. This kind of growth dismantles the fantasy of irreplaceability, not through words, but through evidence. He forms healthier connections. His energy stabilizes. His presence becomes more grounded, more selective, and there is no invitation back into the narrative, no signal that she remains a reference point. Many men misunderstand this. They believe moving on loudly is strength. In reality, silent expansion is what endures. When improvement is not announced, it cannot be contested. The reflection to leave with is this: when your life continues to deepen without needing an audience or an enemy, you confirm the most powerful truth of all, that your value was never dependent on who stayed, and that is why you are never truly forgotten.